We can't say all the things we're about to say.
Be careful what I do in the word.
You should have received a fuchsia ticket when you came in. It's for the whole series. Please show it each time you get here. You will find the schedule on the back of the ticket. You'll note that you get 2 nights off. There's no lecture on October 19th when this room will be used for midterms. Unless you want to come and take a midterm or something. And there will be no lecture on November 2nd, which, as you may be aware, is election day. For this series, the lecture committee of the adult school has asked a group of experts to examine with us the topic, sex, gender, and social change. The speakers will discuss the challenge to sex roles, gender identity, and social institutions from a variety of disciplines and backgrounds: biology, law, politics, psychology, sociology, literature, and religion. It's probably a measure of the complexity and the importance of the subject that it touches so many aspects of life and society. The goal of the series is to increase our understanding of these important issues and how they affect all of us. We're fortunate indeed to start the series with Lee Silver. Professor Silver's undergraduate degree is from the University of Pennsylvania and was in physics, and his PhD from Harvard and postgraduate work at Sloan Kettering. He is professor in the Department of Molecular Biology and the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. Here at Princeton, he's also a member of the Program in Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy, the Center for Health and Well-Being, and the Office of Population Research. The author of numerous publications, including the forthcoming Challenging Mother Nature, Biotechnology in the Spiritual World. Mr. Silver also is teaching an undergraduate course titled Human Genetics, Reproduction, and Public Policy, and a graduate seminar in biotechnology policy. In his research interests and his teaching, Professor Silver is addressing the challenges and concerns raised by advances in technology that, for most of us, have only been found in science fiction. But they are no longer fiction. Scientific advances have made them very real, and we need to understand that reality. To help us get started in understanding this great new world, Professor Silver is going to talk to us tonight about evolution of the behavioral difference between boys and girls, gays and straights, why it is so hard to change the game.
People can't, can everybody hear me? Okay. I'm going to talk about sex tonight, which is always a hot topic. And I'd also like to have the audience participate, if possible. If you want to say anything, that would be great. I don't like talking about things that are not controversial, so it's going to be extremely controversial. I'm a biologist, I'm a scientist, trained originally in physics and biology, And so that's and now I'm at the Woodrow Wilson School doing science policy, but my perspective is as a scientist, and I'm going to present to you tonight a scientist's view of what sex and gender are about. And it's a view that has been challenged. If you've seen this book cover, this is a book called Gender Shock, and essentially what the author of this book says is that there's not really any difference between men and women, and that you can go back and forth as you please, and cultures make people more male or more female. And that's basically what this book says. So the next picture I'll show you calls this into question. So the question is, if that's what we were looking at on the screen, how many of you would think this was a man? And how many would you think was a woman? Right? Most of you think this is a woman, right? Especially before recent cosmetic surgery and hormone therapy and all of that. There's no way a man could have been born like that unless they were extremely mutant. So this calls into question the notion that men and women are the same. If you look at those breasts, they're clearly, they belong to Dolly Parton, by the way. That first picture is what men look at, right? This is what women look at. That also is a difference between the two of them. So this is the question. This is the question that's going to inform everything that I'm going to talk to you about tonight. Okay? And it's this. Why does Dolly Parton have such large breasts? Now, this is obviously funny, but in fact, I want you to think about that. Why do you think she has such large breasts? So I'm going to show you another picture here on the next slide. And this is a couple of pictures that I took when my family went backpacking across Southeast Asia. And these are different tribes of Vietnamese women. And if you go across Vietnam, and I did this looking for women with large breasts, you find 0 women with large breasts in Vietnam. And these are actually, these women that you're looking at here are very, very different from each other. This is blue Hmong, red Hmong, I mean they're called Hmong, that's sort of an English word for them. Black Hmong, these people live up in the mountains, and that woman who's carrying about 100 pounds worth of fruit there is down on the coastal areas. They're different from each other. None of them have large breasts. And you can notice on the right, and they're breastfeeding their children. Over here, the woman on the right has a child. So clearly, you don't need large breasts to feed children, to nurse children. In fact, if you look at monkeys and chimpanzees and other animals like that, none of them have large breasts. Especially even when they're breastfilled with milk, when they're nursing, the rest of the time they don't have large breasts. So the question is, where do these come from? What is the point? Biologists call this permanently pendulous mammary glands are not needed to nurse babies. So where do they come from? Why do we have them? So why do some people carry, there's a word missing there, why do some people carry around the extra weight? Well, what I'm going to tell you is, and it's almost certainly because of, for the same reason that this is a lizard that we saw in Belize, Central America, last December, and this is another lizard, the same species, okay? And this lizard only, the one on the top, looks different from the one on the bottom. The one on the bottom is bright orange. It is only bright orange for about a month out of the year when it wants to mate. But the bottom one is the male. The top one is females. The male is very, very bright colored. And the question is, why would an animal be so brightly colored? Because it's likely to make it more difficult for the animal to hide. Predators are much more likely to find a brightly colored animal, and yet the animal turns bright orange every year. And here are some other examples of animals that do things that are not intuitively good for them. So if you look, here's the classic peacock, it's gigantically long tail. It stops it from flying. It makes it much, much slower on the ground. These two birds over here are the same species. Females up there on the right, and that's the same species. That's the bright red, blue, yellow bird down there on the bottom. And all of these animals evolved these exotic, very, very bright features independently of each other. And what I'm going to tell you is that these have a relationship to Dolly Parton's breasts, which is what we're going to talk about now. So the first question is why? So why does Dolly Parton have big breasts? Why is this bird over here brightly colored? Why does the peacock have a long tail? And when you ask the why question, in terms of philosophy, you can answer it either with a proximate, what's called proximate answer, or an ultimate answer. So the proximate answer is the closest to the causal effect. And the proximate answer, we know. The proximate answer, basically, is because of their genes. In other words, these animals, these are not things that happened because they thought about them after they came into life. Genes, Dolly Parton's genes gave her a large breast. That bird's genes, the genes that are present in the embryo, in the animal, are responsible. So we know that. And in fact, the most amazing thing about modern genomic and genetic research, I mean, I've been in genetics, molecular genetics for 20 years, and every year I get blown away by the advances. It's just incredible. We're going to learn about all of these things, what genes are actually involved. Well, we know it's genes. It's clearly genes that are involved in that. So that's the proximate answer for all of these. And the ultimate answer for why these genes exist must be in evolutionary forces, because we are, human beings maybe not, but all other animals and our ancestors were slaves to the forces of evolution. And so the question then becomes, why did evolution do this? Why did evolution make these males and females look so different from each other? Now, to answer that question, we have to go back and study evolution, or we're going to give you kind of a real quick survey of evolution by natural selection, and then explain to you why this doesn't fit into evolution by natural selection. It's evolution by a different mechanism that we're going to talk about. So this is a man. I came back. This is in the morning. This is actually at a beach. You can go on the western coast of India. If anybody's seen the recent movie called The Born something or other, huh? Born Supremacy. There's a scene right there, actually, on that beach, just where the born guy is running home. It's a great beach. And what you see here is this guy just arrived from England on the left. He has no suntan lotion on. He's going to be fried like a crisp in a couple of hours. Whereas the woman who's trying to sell something there is smartly covered up. Also has dark skin, which is going to protect her. And so these are, I'm going to talk about exactly how this happens in a minute, but this is classical, what we call classical evolution, that made these people look different from each other. So to explain evolution, I'm going to back off from a biological explanation first, because evolution is actually beyond biology. Evolution is almost a fundamental force. And I want you to consider this science fiction fable, okay? So this is the idea, and you'll see how evolution just falls out of it. You don't need evidence. All you need is to be able to look logically, and you'll see that evolution has to occur whenever you have organisms that are doing the kinds of things these organisms are doing. And I'm going to tell you about the science fiction tale, and then I'm going to show you some evidence from non-biological creatures and then biological creatures. So imagine that engineers build a self-replicating robot to work on Mars. Okay, so these robots, they run around Mars and they do whatever work that needs to be done, and they replicate themselves. And the way they replicate themselves is after a while, the robot takes an inventory of all the parts in its body, and it makes an exact copy of itself. Okay, and it does that on Mars. Now, when you have that kind of replication, when you have organisms even just making 2 copies, and then those 2 make 4 copies, et cetera, you get exponential growth. Exponential growth, it's quite amazing how quickly things become very, very large with exponential growth. When I was a first-year graduate student, I remember my teacher, a guy named Wally Gilbert, asked us to guess how long it would take for a single bacterial cell to if it was allowed to grow with the right nutrients that made it allow it to grow optimally, how long it would take for the one bacterial cell, which is microscopic, you can't see it, to cover the surface of the Earth? Anybody gather a guess to the answer to that question? The bacteria divides every 30 minutes, and the answer is about a day and a half if it had optimal amounts of food. Now, Darwin recognized this problem, you see, because if you have this population of robots, eventually, and these robots are reproducing themselves, eventually what must happen, because every environment is finite, what must happen is the raw materials must become scarce. So whatever the robot's is digging for iron and silicon, whatever else it's digging for, in terms of geological time, in a very brief period of time, it's going to run out of materials to be able to build copies of itself. Okay. So now, while that's happening, while it's running out of materials, an occasional mistake might be made in copying. So even though the human engineers who had built these robots built them to just copy themselves, in my science fiction tale here, if by chance an occasional one is able to dig deeper than the engineers actually programmed it to do, it's going to be able to dig deeper, get needed materials, it's going to be able to survive better than the ones that were the original ones, right? By chance, if another one, just by accident, it's programmed, there's a couple of mutations in its program, and instead of digging for materials, it cannibalizes its neighbor. So it wants to make another robot, so instead of digging for iron, it just takes apart its neighbor and makes a copy of itself with this new characteristic. Okay, so we can imagine that kind of happening, and if that kind of thing happens, one digs deeper, by chance another cannibalizes its neighbor from these parts, very, very quickly, that's all that's going to be left. All the robots that are not cannibals will disappear, because they're all going to be basically used up by cannibals. So those are the only ones that will be left. But then further herbs would provide some protection against cannibalization, others with added advantages, and so you see the robots are competing with each other. Nobody told them to compete with each other. That's just what happens when you're in a situation like that, where you have individuals replicating themselves, copying themselves. A chance mistake can be made, and there's limited resources. That has to happen. So that's the evidence for evolution. You don't have to look at fossils to find the evidence, as long as those two things are correct. That organisms can replicate themselves with occasional mistakes. And offspring of the mutated mutants will replace the original mutants, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So could this really happen? Well, and how far can the process go, and what do we call this process? So the first thing I'm going to tell you about is artificial life in Tierra. Tierra is a cyberspace world. It was first invented by Ray Thomas, who was University of Maryland computer scientist. This is back in the days of old computers. I have my keychain now, more memory. I remember when I was in college, there was a computer that took up this entire room where I went to college, and it had less memory than I just had on my keychain. Actually, less memory than it takes to run this particular program. Ray Thomas created a computer program. He created a program using a very, very simple code. And so the code is so simple that any bit mutation is, if you have normal computer code and you get a bug, the computer crashes. So that's the problem with normal computer code. But he used a special kind of computer code. It was 5-bit instructions. And so a change in the code by a occasional accidental change in the code would give a different instruction. It wouldn't just crash the computer like bugs do today. So he had a computer program, and the computer program copied itself into empty disk space and occasionally had rare random mutations. So that's how he started out. One program, the rest of the disk is empty, and so this thing starts making copies of itself. So what happens? One of the most important things I should point out is that he tried to get the shortest program that he could possibly imagine that would replicate itself, and that was 80 instructions. 80 instructions, as you can see over there. Now, what's going on here is that programs that replicate themselves more quickly are going to fill up the computer disk more quickly, Right? So we let it go into the computer disk. The program was told, programmed just to use the part of the disk that was empty, and he let it go. So what happened? Okay. Well, mutations occurred during the process of copying, and offspring became smaller. So in other words, these programs went from 80 to 79 to 75 instructions, basically smarter than he was, because he thought that the minimum number of instructions that you needed to be able to replicate itself was 80. And then all of what would happen is going down to 79, 78, it kept on going down to about 75, and less instructions, it could reproduce itself more quickly. So these programs were doing something that human beings couldn't do. Right? They were figuring out a solution to this problem, how to replicate itself more quickly. And then all of a sudden he found this. You can actually do this on your own computer. You can find this on the internet. It's fun because it happens, it's a little bit different every time. But all of a sudden there was a sudden drop to 45 instructions because the program discovered how to parasitize code from its cousins. And so it could do rapid, so instead of having to copy the code, it just took code that already existed and put that into its offspring, right? And so, and those programs just basically wiped out the other programs. And as empty disk space became scarce, new programs copied over, even though they were told not to. They started killing the other programs that were already there, right, to free up the real estate so that they could get into what was there. And then newer programs, and so once they're doing that, newer programs develop immunity against the parasitic programs. These are just, pieces of code that are battling each other in this little cyberspace land. He was shocked. He didn't expect this. Nobody expected this. And the amazing thing is that every time you run this program, this kind of stuff happens. It's parasitism. It was never programmed in. Parasitism happens. Defense against parasitism happens. Programs become leaner and leaner. And that's what happens in this artificial world. What we call this is evolution by natural selection. Okay? And the idea basically is the force on these programs are the one that replicates itself faster is going to survive at the expense of the others. The one that can find space, kill off its neighbors, and survives. And so every single time we do this is the kind of stuff that happens, even though it's a little bit different every time. Okay, from virtual reality to physical reality, two MIT scientists about 2 or 3 years ago, they did a similar kind of experiment, but what they did is they had a virtual, they had a bunch of tools, they had a bunch of what are they called, Lego-like things, little motors that were lying around on the ground in their virtual cyberspace. And then what they did was had gravity, friction, raw materials, fixed balls, actuators, artificial neurons, and they just let this stuff sort of come together. Okay, and they let the stuff come together, and then in each generation, they would see which things, I don't know what you want to call these things, got furthest away from the starting point. So in the beginning, you can get far away from the starting point by sort of building yourself up and rolling over. So then those get selected, okay, and the other ones all get killed. And then that one is allowed to evolve further. Basically what they did is they did this, and after 300 to 600 generations, let's see if I'll get this to run, they would get these organisms. I'm not sure I have the, no, that's not right there, different computer. This is a little contraption that basically, you can watch it, it kind of moves, it kind of walks along the ground, and every time you run the program, you get a different contraption. So who designed these things? The engineers, the computer programs did not design these. Okay, evolution designed these. I mean, it's a bizarre, counterintuitive idea that these things, these very sophisticated things, could evolve by themselves, but they did. Okay, so let's go back to this picture of the man and the woman on the beach in India and ask why. The other thing besides sex that's always controversial, of course, is race, racial differences. So the question is why, and as I said, I like to talk about controversial things. So the question is, why does the guy on the left have very little pigment in his skin, and the one on the right is very pigmented? You can see higher levels of skin pigmentation. And it's a very, very good example of what geneticists refer to as competing evolutionary forces. So there's two competing forces on skin color. Okay, On the one hand, if you don't have pigmentation, I came back later in the day and this guy was, as I said, like a lobster. If you don't have skin pigmentation, there's a higher risk of sunburn and a higher risk of skin cancer. That's what happens if you don't have pigmentation, like this guy here on the left. But if you have too much pigmentation, and you're living in northern northern latitudes, then you're not going to be able to, you have a risk of vitamin D deficiency because you're going to have to use ultraviolet sunlight to come in through your skin to change provitamin D into vitamin D. So there's a balance in how much pigmentation you should have in your skin. And what happens is as populations of human beings, I'll show you here, went out across the world, so all of our ancestors were in Africa 50,000 years ago, and some people walked out to Europe, some people walked across Asia, and you can see all the arrows coming out of Africa, and as they went into different parts of the world, there was selective pressure to have different pigmentation amounts. So in Africa, where the sun's right overhead, you can get vitamin D pretty easily because there's a lot of sunlight, and so your skin becomes, all of our ancestors were black. That's an interesting concept. We're all black if you go back far enough. And then as you go out of Europe, you sort of go up, and that's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just as an example, somebody who comes from this Iranian area. And then you go further up into Sweden and no pigmentation. And it's interesting, what I find fascinating is these two little girls here on the right came from people who were almost certainly lighter skinned than they are. In other words, as the people migrated up into Asia, the pigmentation goes down, and then they went back. People, this little girl here is from Indonesia, and her pigmentation actually is not the same as the pigmentation found in Africa. It's a different set of genes that were used. And evolutionarily, I mean, it shows you how powerful evolution is. It's difficult work in 50,000 years to change skin color based on a slight better chance of avoiding skin cancer or avoiding vitamin D deficiencies. That's what you're balancing out in this particular case. So it's a good example. Now, genes aren't, I mean, that was an easy one, right? This is seeing, you can see how, you know, if you have a gene that allows you to survive longer, it's going to increase in the population. Eventually, the whole population is going to have that gene. What about behavior? Okay, so because when we talk about sex and gender, really what we want to understand is behavior. What do genes have to do with behavior? So this is the most amazing example. Actually, I'm going to give you two amazing examples, but this one is great. This is an example that Charles Darwin actually used in The Origin of Species, and it's the cuckoo bird. I don't know how many of you know why we think the cuckoo bird is cuckoo, but this is the reason. This is the reason why. So these birds, they're monogamous. So this is a pair. I mean, this is a drawing actually, but male and female birds they pair up, and they never build their own nests. What they do is the male actually, the female and the male come together when they're mature, and the male goes looking for other nests of other species. And when another bird has laid her eggs into the nest, the male comes back and tells the female, and the female cuckoo bird goes to that nest and lays its egg in another species' nest. Okay. And then, so the cuckoo mother lays one egg in the nest of another bird, and then she takes off. Okay, so this is the egg on the left is a cuckoo egg, and the egg on the right belongs to that bird up there. Birds aren't smart, they can't count, right? So, you know, they come back, they don't know that there's more eggs there than cuckoo mother leaves her egg behind, and she never returns. That's it. That's, you know, there's, you know, no parental love here whatsoever. She goes off, and, you know, the next year she'll lay an egg someplace else. She never meets her children. Okay. Now, what happens next is the foster mother, if you want to call her that, is fooled and thinks the egg belongs to her. Think in quotation marks, of course. And the cuckoo chick is going to hatch. This is all programmed into the chick. The cuckoo chick hatches before the other eggs of that species. And it looks for the other eggs. It does something which my wife thought was horrible, which is it pushes them out of the nest. and they all go splat on the ground. Okay, and this is an example. This is as soon as it hatches. Here you can see an example. And then this bird that pushes all the other birds out of the nest will grow up and do the same thing that its mother did, even though it never met its mother, never was told what to do. This is just to give you an example. This is a picture. It's hard to see this exactly. It's an amazing picture. This is a chick that's just hatched, and its head is to the left, and it's pushing its back against the other egg to try to push it out of the nest. I mean, in any which way, it's going to get rid of all the other eggs, okay? It's amazing behavior, right? I mean, it hasn't even eaten anything yet. So it pushes all the other eggs all go splat, and then it gets all the food. And so this is the baby bird. The giant thing is the baby bird. And the one on top is the mother who's feeding the baby she's found in her nest, right? And this is the whole idea. What you find in your nest, you feed. This is the other behavior. Now, people are a little bit smarter than this sometimes, but not always, as I'll show you in a moment. Okay. All of that behavior is programmed into the genes. Complex behaviors can be programmed into the genes. This is another counterintuitive behavior. These are praying mantises. And over here in number one, the female is the big one in front, and the male is behind there on the left. This is a mating dance they're going through. So over here, there's a certain scenario they go through called mating dance. And number two, number three, the male mounts the female. Now, in number four, what you're seeing is the female has put her arm around the neck of the male. And again, this is not out of love. She bites off his head, and then she eats him completely. Okay. So at the end of the sexual act, the male's gone. Okay. He's been eaten by the female. Now, so this also doesn't make sense from classical. If you think of evolution as, survival of the fittest, well, you would think, in those simple terms, of course, any mutation that stopped the male from mating would allow that male to survive longer. But that mutation would never get transmitted to his children. I mean, what's going on here is that she uses him as food, basically, and that gives her more energy. She's more able to raise children that have his genes. So this is all just kind of an aside. And so the different forces of evolution. So far I've told you about natural selection. Many people think that natural selection is you're always adapting to your environment. And Darwin said that's not true. Really what you're adapting to is your neighbors. As I showed you in the case on Mars. What natural selection is all about is you reach a point of limited resources. And one individual or groups of individuals with certain genes are able to better use those resources or kill off their cousins, literally. And that's how evolution works. That's natural selection. Another thing that happens is genetic drift. Genetic drift is when there's a small, and genetic drift accounts for a number of unusual diseases and things. Genetic drift is a group of 10 or 20 people. And just by chance, sometimes there's a mutation which is very prevalent in that small group, just by chance. And then over the years, that population gives rise to a group of people who are likely to have that kind of mutations. That's genetic drift. I'm not going to talk about that. Evolutionary biologists argue about the importance of these two characteristics. I'm going to talk to you about the third major force of evolution. And let's see. And it's called sexual selection. And Charles Darwin was the first one to understand. Charles Darwin, go back and read The Origin of Species, which I've read about 10 times, and it's really remarkable that he knew. And people ignored this part of it, and you'll see why, for a very long time. And this is what he said. He said, animals having separated sexes, interpreting it, male and female, there will in most cases be a struggle between the males for possession of the females. Success will often depend on having special weapons or means of defense against the males, or on the charms of the males, and the slightest advantage will lead to victory. Now, I say he's on the right track. He didn't really get it right because Darwin's general notion is correct that males compete with each other. He was absolutely wrong in understanding power relations between the sexes, probably because of his Victorian perspective. like the males don't possess the female in almost every species. It's the female who chooses which male to mate with. So this, I mean, there's a basic fact of biology, which is that you don't need that many males to be able to reproduce in the population. A population with 1 male and 100 females is no less reproductive than a population with 100 males and 100 females. So the females can choose who they want to mate with. And the males have to compete with each other to be the choice of the females. Now this is all coming back to why the peacock has the bright tail, why the birds have bright tails, and then we're going to go to Dolly Parton's breast, and which doesn't seem to fit, but it will. I'll show you. Okay. So this is called sexual selection. And sexual selection is a consequence of the ability to choose a mate. So sexual selection only operates in species that have sentience, basically. It only operates once animals came into existence and once sex was invented. Sex was invented 600 million years ago. That's the first time there were two sexes and animals came together to reproduce. I can give you 5 lectures on why there's sex. People argue about why sex. Why does reproduction just occur by cloning? But that's for another lecture. This is what's going on now with the birds. Okay. And initially, bright colors and long tails were a true sign of greater fitness. So imagine a female bird, and she's out there trying to decide which male to mate with, and one male has brighter feathers than the other male. This is before they look like a peacock. Okay. So she's looking at the different birds. Well, what's going to happen is that the bird with the brighter feathers is more likely to be healthy than the bird with the dull feathers. Now, there are lots of reasons why it might be more healthy, but one of the reasons it might be more healthy is because it has better genes that allow it to be more healthy than the bird with the dull feathers. So a female that was able somehow to recognize bright feathers, now all of this is subconscious, right? And they don't know what they're doing. But a female who could recognize the male with bright feathers would be more likely to have children who were better off than if she mated with the guy with dull feathers. Okay, so that's the first step. Bright colors and longer tails were a true sign of greater fitness. And then what happens sexual selection is a 2-part thing. By chance, a genetic combination that directed the female behavior toward choosing the brightest, biggest tailed male for a mate. So in other words, females that had genes which programmed them to mate with bright males, are going to have children, 2 kinds of children. They're going to have what are called sexy sons. This is a real biological term. And wise daughters. Okay. And the idea is that a female that has these genes will have her sons will be more likely to be bright colored and healthy, and her daughters are more likely to just choose the males like their fathers. Right. Females with properly genetically programmed behavior. So the sexy sons, bright colors, longer tails. Wise daughters programmed to choose sexy sons. And so sexual selection, I'm not making these phrases up, this is actually the phrases that you'll find in these journals of evolutionary biology. The sexual selection amplifies a pair of connected traits. Okay? It's operating on females, their behavior, and it's operating on males. And what happens is that the behavior is in the choosing sex, and almost always is the female who chooses. And the physical object of the behavior is in the sex being chosen. So for the peacocks, for example, the physical object being chosen is the long tail. And what happens, and this is really remarkable, is that once you have the system in place, it goes wild. Okay, you get this feedback loop. Once you have birds just choosing males who have long tails, what will happen is that males that have longer and longer tails, because of mutations, are going to be the ones that get a chance to mate, and the ones that don't have the longest tail don't get to mate. And so the males get longer and longer and longer tails in response to the female's behavior, which is to find the birds with the longest tail. Now, so what's happening in a sense is it has nothing to do with health anymore. It's just sort of a runaway loop that is going on here. And this is an example of a female, and remarkably, so the male's basically showing himself off to her. And she's going to be able to look at him, look at 5 other males, and calculate which one is the, seriously, calculate subconsciously which one has the best features so that she can mate with him. Sexual selection is, most scientists would agree today, is much more powerful than natural selection, even though it wasn't recognized for 100 years after Darwin. Okay, so let's come back to Dolly Parton. So what is happening here? What's happening here? You don't need breasts that big to nurse children, but what is happening here is in our ancestors in certain parts of the world and not others, and it's not clear why this happened in some parts of the world and not others, our ancestors looked at women and thought that women who had bigger breasts were going to be able to nurse, and this is all subconscious now, we're going to be able to nurse babies better, and therefore they'd be able to have more children that survive if they mated with a woman with larger breasts than another woman. And then this is the result of a runaway feedback loop. Okay? It makes no sense, really. But it's just one of these things that, men like, there was a real reason in the beginning to like a woman with bigger breasts because it really did provide an evolutionary advantage. And then you get to the point where it goes crazy. This is another, I want to show you this example. It's not genetic, it's cultural. But it's an analogous situation. So this is a Burmese refugee, actually, in Thailand. My daughter's on the left. And what's happened is, for some reason, the men in their tribe like women with long necks. And so, over the years, the women make their necks longer by putting on these rings, which you can see my daughter's shoulders and this woman's shoulders over here. You'll see how long the neck has become. And again, this is runaway feedback loop where the next people are becoming longer and longer. They're trying to do the same thing to their legs. You should see over there in the right picture. So this is not genetic. It's a cultural analog, a runaway feedback loop. Just to give you an example. It's interesting, this has happened actually independently in tribes in Asia, Africa, and South America. Independently, for some reason, these tribes, a number of tribes have this long necks. And there's, again, nobody really understands what the initial rationale was behind this. There's lots of stories. And nobody knows what the truth is. And I'll know what the truth there. One of the stories is that women who have these gold rings around, brass rings around their neck, are protected from tigers coming out of their jungle, kill the women who don't have rings around their neck. I don't know if that's meaningful or not. Okay, these are the cause. Now, these birds are different. Yeah?
Just to come back to Dolly Parton.
Sure.
One is if
I'd be happy.
if it's the man who's, the female is typically the chooser in the sexual selection.
That's exactly what I'm going to talk about right now. Okay. Why are both male and female macaws beautiful? Okay, so this is a pair of macaws. Macaws are related to parrots in the Amazon jungle. And nobody, even the best bird watcher, can't tell which is the male and which is the female, unless you capture them, right? So they're both magnificent if you ever go and you see this. So what's your question? What's going on here? Why are the females of this species also beautiful, just like the males? Whereas the peacocks, the males were beautiful, and the lizard I showed you was just the males that were trying to show off. The reason is because these birds are monogamous. And so what happens in when you choose monogamy, these birds are programmed for monogamy, you're getting everybody's competing. Right? The males are competing with each other for the females, but the females, if you have a monogamous culture like these birds have, the females are also competing with each other for the males. Because once a male gets taken by one female, he can't be used by a second female. So you get this situation happening in both sexes at the same time. You have monogamy. So that's the question you were going to ask, right? And this is really amazing. And again, the monogamy, and we'll come back to monogamy in a second. Okay, so definition of instincts. There are instincts that are really important to successful mating. And in the story of evolution, nothing else counts except mating and making babies. Okay, that's the only thing that you get points for in evolutionary terms. And what I'm telling you is that there are instincts, sex-specific or gender-specific instincts that play a role, a major role here. So what are instincts? Instincts are behaviors programmed into the genome. Now, I'm going to modify that. I'm going to soften that in a minute. You'll see. But for the moment, I'm just going to say instincts are behaviors programmed into the genome. Instincts exist for a single reason. They evolve because they increase the chances of reproductive success of the genes that cause the instincts. If you do a mathematical analysis, that's the only thing that makes any sense for why instincts exist. The genes that cause the instincts that promote mating are the ones that get transmitted. Now, the interesting thing is that we don't have genes because they're good for us, because we had no idea what was good for us. Our genes had no idea what was good for us. All of our genes are present because they helped our ancestors. And many moral philosophers actually think that there are lots of genes in the human population that are actually bad for us in the current world that we live in today. But that's because these genes, most of the genes that affect our behaviors evolved a long time ago when human populations were small, tribal populations, and you had different needs. People had different needs back then, but then the human population exploded, and we're never going to evolve. We'll talk about that later. And so we have all these genes that are not necessarily doing us any good. So let me give you some examples of reproductive instincts in other animals before we talk about humans. This is something that I worked with mice for 20 years of my life, and one of the things that you'll notice is that put male mice into a cage. If you have brothers growing up together, they're okay. They don't fight with each other. But if you put two male mice together who have never met each other before, they start fighting. That's been known for a long time. And what they try to do is they try to bite off each other's testicles. Now, they don't know what they're doing, right? But that makes a lot of sense, because basically all they're trying to do is make sure the other guy doesn't eat. Okay, that's what they're trying to do. And you watch and you go and you look at these cages, and the males fight with each other, and then as soon as the testicles are off one male, the second male quits. Because that's all he's trying to do is get rid of the reproductive potential of the other male. So, then you have a male without testicles. A pregnant female mouse will self-abort if her partner loses the battle. So mice live in harems where there's like one male and 8 females, and as the male gets older, the males are always in competition with other males. Most males never get a chance to mate unless they get beat up and take over another male's harem. And what happens is if the female is pregnant and her husband, whatever you want to call him, loses, she aborts. Okay, so that she can get pregnant with the new guy who's obviously stronger than the old guy. Spontaneous abortion. We're not talking about therapeutic things. A mother bird fakes a broken wing to distract the predator's attention. Children learn about this. How the fox comes to the nest and the mother has to pretend she has a broken wing, and she distracts the fox and pulls the fox away and she flies off. The bird doesn't know what it's doing. It's all instinctive behavior. Birds are not smart enough to know what they're doing. All of these animals are not smart enough to know what they're doing. This is all instinctive behavior that serves the purpose of their genes. So, this is the question. Do macaws get married? They're very faithful to each other. They never leave each other's side. And there are certain species that are monogamous, other species are not. Is that the same thing as marriage? I don't know. We can talk about that, what the difference is. Do male mice try to prevent each other from breeding? Does the female know she's being duplicitous? It's easy to anthropomorphize animal behavior, but it's wrong to do so. They don't know what they're doing. They're being driven as slaves by their genes, unknowingly by their genes. This is what we know. Now, this is so this is okay, right? None of you have a problem with this. Somebody does, they should speak up. The problem becomes when we apply this to human beings, right? And nobody wants to believe that we're slaves to our genes. So that's the question. Do humans have instincts as well? Well, what I'm going to tell you, or I'm going to suggest to you, is that the answer is yes, we do have instincts. We're a little bit different than other animals, as I'll show you in a moment, but we do have instincts in our genes. And one of the things that people have a hard time understanding is that we can have competing instincts within a single individual. And the best example of that is what's called the flight versus fight response that every animal has. So what happens is a male, both males are trying to kill each other, right? So a male comes up against a competitor, and inside of the brain of this male, it has to make an instant decision whether to stay and fight or leave or run away. Okay? And if it makes the wrong decision, it's dead, basically. And so its brain is like a little computer calculating what its competitor is like, what are the chances of its winning the fight, what are the chances of its not winning the fight. Again, it's all unconscious, okay? So it does one or two things which are opposite. Either it fights or it runs away. Inside the same brain are instincts that are exactly the opposite of each other. The same thing. So just because different people respond to stimuli in different ways doesn't mean that those are instinctive. It's just you're taking account of the situation. Instincts can vary to different degrees among individuals. And as I said a moment ago, how relevant are these instincts to humans today? All of our genes are adapted to past cultures. Some happen to help us, others don't. Most of them became fixed in the Stone Age or before. And this is really important, and I have political battles over this. Being instinctive or natural does not imply ethical or good. Just because something is natural, I tell you all sorts of awful, terrible things that are natural that I think are wrong. I mean, you can't derive, I would claim, morality from nature. So important to think of things in that way. Now, the one thing that we can do that animals can't do, especially if you're in this room right here, you can be conscious of your instincts. And the instincts are what your genes are trying to make you do. But people sometimes, if they're strong enough, can say, this is what my instinct said, I'm going to go against my instinct. Right? No other animal can do that except us. We cannot contrary to instincts, the forces of culture, or self-motivation. Some instincts are harder to overcome, and by many or some people. It doesn't mean that everybody has, I don't think that most people are actually able to overcome their instincts. If you look at people who are having a problem with weight, for example, people keep eating and eating. They know they eat too much food and it causes them to gain weight, and yet the instinct is to eat food because back in the Stone Age you never knew where your next meal was coming from. So if there was food there, you ate. So there are lots of instincts that we can be aware of, doesn't necessarily mean we can overcome them. Okay, so let's go to men and women. These are the curves for men and women. This is where I said I was going to modify the notion about instincts. One of the questions I asked on the first day I asked my class, I say, I'm going to give you a declarative statement and ask if it's true or false. Men are taller than women. Now, I asked my class that, and they're very confused about that. And the answer is it's a lousy question. You can't answer a question because the question doesn't have a meaning. If you look at the height of men and women in any population, that's what it looks like over here. And in fact, if you look at differences between men and women in anything, first of all, you're going to find different means. In other words, the middle point for the women is going to be different than the middle point for men. Everything that's been looked at, that's true. At the same time, there are going to be men who, whatever it is, a behavior, physiological thing, height, whatever you do, there are going to be some men who are below the curve for the women. So if you put two people in a room and you say, okay, person A is taller than person B, would you bet $1,000 that person A was a man? Well, maybe not, because it's totally unpredictable. Yes, the means are different, but that doesn't mean that you can use this information to predict which one's going to be taller, or which one, just because you know somebody's a man or a woman, which one's going to behave in a particular their way. But, and this is the important, this is where I'm trying to distinguish between, a lot of people think in these black and white areas, it's, it's either, men and women are different, or men and women aren't different, okay? And so what I'm telling you is it's more complicated than both of those over here. Now, if you have this genetic background, I'm showing you kind of the yellow and the blue curves over there. We also have a post-genetic alteration that can occur. And so people can, so women and men can, whatever it is, can be modified by the environment more or less to a degree. Now, the little circle out there on the right side, I put there on purpose to represent the Olympics. And why do we have different events for men and women in the Olympics? And the answer is, if you take something like running, for example, the men who compete in the Olympics and the women who compete in the Olympics they're all severely mutant. They're way, way, way off the curve. Okay, otherwise you don't get to compete. Okay, so they're for those who don't know that, it's 5 or 6 standard deviations. So over there on the right side is the fastest runners in the world. And what happens is that it's always going to be a man who wins the race because of these two curves. Because the yellow curve, you see that the blue curve will fade away, the yellow curve fades away faster. So if you have a situation like running, so men in general have a mean that allows them to run faster than women, there's never going to be a woman that can beat them unless you have fancy stuff like genetic engineering and hormonal supplements and things like that. But purely genetics, purely from an inheritance point of view. So this is a curve, it's a very important set of curves because it basically describes everything. The differences between men and women and why sometimes men are less like men, the average man than women are, etc. Okay, I want to have time for a talk, so I'm not going to bash sociologists here, so we'll go on to the next one. Categories of primate. So this is the last thing I'll do, and then I'll open it up for questions and discussion. These are tamarins. You see how beautiful they are. In Malaysia, they're monogamous, and so they find a mate and they live with their mate their entire lives. These are bonobos, and they've been called the sexiest animals alive. They do a couple of very interesting things. First, they mate facing each other. So they're the only species other than humans that actually face each other while they mate. The second thing they do, only like humans, is they mate continuously throughout their estrous cycle. So other animals, like dogs, for example, it's only when the females keep the males and the dog mate with the female. Bonobos mate all the time. So if you go to the San Diego Zoo to see bonobos, I spent a day there, and there were 7 animals, and there were 4 copulations in a period of 6 hours. They're small. They mate with each other whenever they feel like it. The other thing they do is that these are 2 females mating, what I call mating with each other. So they're also the other species. So in other words, they're not choosing. Females, males, male, female, do it anyway. They can do it. So that's why they're called the sexiest animals. They're very, very promiscuous. Okay, so they're promiscuous. By promiscuous, I mean there's no bonding that occurs between 2 animals. Okay, now these are the 3 kinds. I want us to understand what human beings are like compared to these other primates. So different primates have evolved different strategies. Gibbons, tamarins are bonded and monogamous. Gorillas are bonded and polygamous. Now, you might think this is a contradiction. It's not. In gorilla societies, there's one male, and he'll have a harem of about 8 or 10 females who are loyal to him. So in other words, they are bonded to him, and they won't mate with any other male, unless some other male beats them up. But they are bonded to him. Chimps and bonobos are instinctively unbonded. So there's 3 very different kinds of mating personality, I'll call it. And there are other primates, they all fall into one of these categories. Okay. Now, one of the things that happens is that through evolution, this has had a consequence on the testes size of the animals. So Notice over here, if you look at the sperm, that doesn't mean that you can use this information to predict which one's going to be taller or which one. Consequence on the testis size of the animals. So males have 60 million sperm approximately each ejaculation, whereas gorillas have 5 million. When chimps and bonobo males, and again this is also not conscious at all, because they're all promiscuous, and the female sperm has a better chance of getting his sperm, the one that's going to be fertilized in the egg. And so you have this. It's a great picture. I love this sort of, primitive genetics. Okay, and this is a counterexample. Okay, this is Taj Mahal in India. It's unbelievable. It took 30 years. It made this kingdom go bankrupt, and it's because this man's loved this woman who died. And so he spent all the money in his kingdom for 30 years to erect this monument to her. And so, this is a guy who had all the money. He could have made it with lots of women. But it's an example, probably genetically, of somebody who had a greater tendency towards monogamy. And so I'm showing you that there are a lot of variations. Okay, what's best for a woman? Well, biology prevents women from spreading their seed, like men, and the best strategy for a woman is to mate with the best genetic partner. Again, I'm not talking about conscious, I'm talking about subconscious strategies. You want to have the kids with the best genes, you want to find a man with the best genes, and it makes no sense to mate with multiple men, because you just need one man to fertilize your egg. Nothing's to be gained from promiscuity. Okay, this is for women. So who's better off with polygamy and monogamy? Well, in a polygamous society, I'm not going to talk about polyandry for a moment. So a polygamous society is one which is one guy who has all women, right? So more women can get the alpha male, and less men get any women at all. So if you go to Saudi Arabia, for example, where men have up to 4 wives. Actually, it's been reduced from the way it used to be, which means that 3/4 of the men don't get any women. Okay, so they're not very happy. So it's good for women because all women get a chance, but most of the men don't. Polygamy is better for women, but worse for most men. In a monogamous society, actually monogamy is better for men because most women can get a woman, but it's not good for women because very few women can capture the alpha male. So women have to make, in a monogamous society, have to make do with lesser males because the alpha female has gotten the alpha male. So monogamy is better for men, which is why I think it's become cultural. In a democratic society, especially one in which women don't vote, men are going to vote for monogamy because that's the majority, and then we're going to be better off with monogamy than with any other kind of sexual behavior. Okay, so what mating system is really good for women? And this is really shocking. I'm going to tell it to you and I'm going to tell you the evidence for this. What's really good for women is a secret adulterous monogamy, which lets a mother have her cake and eat it too. And basically she marries the best man she can. And the best man she can marry is somebody who's of equal status to her. And she marries him to provide resources for her child. And then while he's not looking, she hides her ovulation, which human beings do, and doesn't let him know when she's fertile, and she mates with a higher status man to get good genes for her child. High status men are more than willing to oblige. So this is the best strategy for women in a so-called monogamous society, is to find one male. And so what will happen is when women have affairs, they mate up because they can get guys like Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Women can get any man they want. Whereas when men have affairs, they have to mate down, because that's the only woman that are going to sleep with them. No one is conscious of the instinctive forces that drive their behavior, and this is the most remarkable thing. I don't have time for questions, so I'm not going to go into this. Nobody knew about this, and quote, nobody knew about this because all the geneticists were men. And there was an amazing experiment that happened when I was actually a graduate student at Harvard. And it happened, this was back in the 1980s when genetic analysis, DNA analysis first became possible. And they were doing a study on Huntington's disease at Harvard Medical School's Massachusetts General Hospital. And they had all these people that they were looking at. They were looking at children, parents, and grandparents, and all this. And the student who was doing the study found a sample, and the sample clearly had a DNA connection to the mother, but not to the father. So, and the people had been interviewed and said that the children were not adopted. It wasn't artificial insemination. It was just clean. And so he went to the professor, and the professor said, "You made a mistake. Do it again." He did it again, and again, no connection to the father. And so they went back and took blood samples from both parents again. And it was clear that this is called, quote, false paternity. And then when they started looking more and more and more, they found that every population they looked at, except for two, between 5 and 20% of the children are not genetically related to their father, and neither father nor child knows it. So that's pretty remarkable. That means that it's likely that some people in this room don't have a father they think they are. The two populations they looked at where this is not true was the Hasidic Jewish population in Brooklyn and Amish population in Pennsylvania. It makes a lot of sense because in those populations, if you don't buy into the culture, you take off. Right? You're not going to get stuck for your life. So to those two, so women who bought into those cultures actually follow the rules of the culture. Only your mother knows that your father is your father. Sure. I don't have time to tell you the strategy to overcome this problem. Let's just see. This is all sort of what I teach in my course. Okay, women shoot up, men shoot down. Okay, so here's the punchline, right? We have gibbons that don't make very much. They don't have to make very much sperm. Gorillas don't have to make very much sperm. Chimps make a lot because they're promiscuous. So what about human beings? Where do we fall within this table? If females are loyal to one male, the testes will be small. The sperm competition drives up the sperm count. So humans, 50 million sperm. That's what is the average amount of sperm in each ejaculate from a human male. So this suggests that men are competing with each other to fertilize a woman's eggs, even though they don't know it. Okay, that the genes are driving up. So the thing about genes is that you never waste energy on something you don't need. And if you don't need 50 million sperm, it's a waste of energy to make 50 million sperm, so you make less sperm. So it looks like a lot of what's happening is that you have what I'll call this false monogamy. A man or a woman, they're together. The woman can eat her cake, get her cake, eat it too. It's a physical data showing it's a sperm competition of ancestors, which suggests we're all descendants of others. So this is my last slide. Let's talk about it. This is the genetics. Again, it's a great curve. Okay, I mean the curve may not look like this. So this is the genetics of regression. There's many behaviors which vary in population where it's not good to be on either side of the curve. Okay, hyperaggression is not help. It doesn't help you survive because you're likely to freak out and get killed. Being very timid also doesn't help you to survive. And so what happens is these are very complex traits. They're controlled by a large number of genes. And what happens in the population is huge numbers of genes are all kind of floating around and coming together. Most people are kind of in the middle there, but it's not when everybody has the same gene. It's called fixation. It's not fixed. So you have this variation. And the other problem you have is in different cultures select for different degrees of aggression. So some cultures, like American culture, where cowboys can get elected president of the United States. Aggressivity. In Japan, there's probably been selection from the word timidity. That's what I would say. Now, this happens for everything. The novelty seekings and other behavioral trait was a huge genetic influence. Again, risk adverse, not a good idea. To be totally risk adverse, not a good idea to be, taking risks all the time. And so you have to modulate. So the best is in the middle, but then you have a population that kind of floats back and forth. So finally, what about straight and gay? Well, some people, including some gay geneticists that I know, think that what is likely to have happened, why is there gayness in the population? Why are people instinctively gay? Because if you're gay and you're true to who you are, you're not going to have any children, right? So it sounds like that should just be eliminated from the population. The reason it's probably not eliminated from the population is probably it's the curve, it's the end of the curve of something that is actually useful. We're not quite sure what it is, and people have various hypotheses and theories about what can be useful, kind of a moderate amount to make more. Remember, the whole game is making more children. And then some people have genetic combinations which have them being gay without making any children. So this is just sort of the hypothesis, which is not, there's no evidence, so we don't yet know what it is possibly that is being selected for there. So I will stop there and take any questions or discussion. Yes, go ahead.
I was surprised that you presented Dolly Parton's breasts as examples of genetics at work. I think that her breasts have very little to do with nature and a lot to do with culture and specifically technology to express cultural norms. So in fact,
Tell me what her breasts look like. You say they were enhanced.
they are definitely surgically enhanced, and they're surgically enhanced to exaggerate a culturally constructed norm of femininity. So it seems to me actually that your slide of Dolly Parton would still serve you very well, but it would serve not to reflect the power of genes in American or human society, but rather the complex interplay of genes and culture. And
So, but before you continue, okay, why do you think women have naturally large breasts?
as I said, interplay of genes and culture.
No, it's no culture. It's genes. Naturally large breasts.
Well, as you showed in your slides, not all women do have.
No, but I'm saying the women who do, no women in Vietnam have large breasts. That would be completely mutational. That's the point. In some cultures, the culture has selected the genes.
Yes, that was my point. My point is
Yeah,
that
I agree with
there's
you.
an interplay of evolution and culture that, I mean, if you leave either half out of the story, it's an incomplete story.
Yeah, it's interesting that in certain cultures, what we call sexual dimorphism, which means the distinction between males and females, the genetic distinction, is much more exaggerated. So that's true in European, African cultures. It's actually true in India. It's not true in Southeast Asia. So in Southeast Asia, men and women have almost the same bodies. Women have slender hips, and men are more feminine, and there's much less of a difference in those kinds of features. So it's kind of like, with the rings around the neck. Yeah, the culture is causing, the culture, which is the behavior of people. I mean, large breasts in African and European populations didn't happen in the last 1,000 years. It happened long before that, right? But the culture drove men to prefer women who had certain genes. So yeah, in a sense, it's cultural interacting with genes, but women who have naturally large breasts, it's their genes that are giving them large breasts.
Follow-up question?
Yeah.
You familiar with Desmond Morris's body self-mimicry?
Not that, no.
No? But I mean, that would be an answer, that would be a big factor here.
Tell me the name of the book again.
Well, the theory is body self-mimicry. I forget the name of the book, but it's like but you know, it just says that you know, when you made the change from mounting to mating face to face, something had to take the place of the rear.
Oh yeah.
That's body self-mimicry.
No, that's right. It's interesting to me that different cultures, I mean, there's a difference in the culture that's clearly driven the genes in different ways. That hasn't happened in Southeast Asia. Now, what's going to happen in the future, 1,000 years from now, is that because there's migration around the world and we have human beings are basically a single mating population, all these differences are all going to sort of toss away because there's not going to be distinctions.
But I would think body self-mimicry would be something, you know, deep evolutionary time.
Well, then why are Vietnamese women, why are they all flat-chested?
Ask Desmond Morris.
He doesn't, no, I know the book that you're talking about, it's not the name of the book, but yes. No, he's talking in European and African terms. Yeah.
I don't have the brochure that we got for this course, but I'm having trouble relating some terms that I kind of remember from the brochure to what you said here. There was something about the difficulty of altering straight, gay, whatever. Can you relate what is the?
Well, I didn't tell you exactly what those arrows meant. Okay. So you see those arrows there going in both directions. In most of these characteristics, you're born with a certain genetic predisposition. Human beings with culture or with mostly with culture or with self-knowledge can move themselves. Okay, others, culture on top. Let's go back to yours. Culture on top can move you up or down, curve a little bit. But genes are less important in the middle, because if you're in the middle, you can kind of, cultures can move you, to either side. But if you're on the end of the curve, genes play a larger role. And so it's not that genes play the same role in each individual. Genes play, in different individuals, genes may be more or less important depending on, all these curves. Shyness, for example, has a huge, very, very shy children. There's nothing you can do about their shyness. They cannot come out of their shyness because they're at the bottom end of the curve. Any other comments? Yeah.
Yeah. I have a sort of a basic question, I guess, about human evolution. But if you're saying, okay, the human genome was pretty well set by 40,000 years ago.
No.
How many thousand years ago?
It's not set. I mean, look around this room. You can see everybody looks different from each other.
Okay, and so there was the spread
There's
out.
huge diversity actually.
Okay.
Human beings have, because of the size of the population, and also because of the fact that races began to diverge apart from each other before they came back. So the diversity within the human population is 1,000 times larger than any other mammalian population.
Okay, but if you want to look at those adaptations that came out after the migration out of Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
The migration out of Africa was maybe, what?
50,000
years ago, okay.
Right.
But see, my point here is that, okay, 50,000 years ago, I'm thinking, you've got a very small human population, you've got nomadic tribal hunter-gatherers, and, how much opportunity is there within a nomadic tribe to choose the best mate?
Oh,
I mean,
lots.
I would tend to think you'd be marrying your cousin or something like that.
Well, but you're still choosing the best mate. You're still choosing.
Yeah.
I mean, peahens choose the best mate. Right? They're choosing among the males. Every species is
But they're not
choosing.
nomadic hunter-gatherers and tribes, right?
I think they have similar organizations, actually. I mean, the thing about humans, we're very varied. So we have all these competing instincts, unlike other primates. Some primate species are monogamous, others are promiscuous, others are polygamous. As I said, human beings can sort of float between these different possibilities.
I just got to believe that the tribal social organization was a big factor in that early evolution. And so what comes to mind in my mind is, okay, you've got this tribe gathered around the fire, having these very elaborate philosophical discussions about,
There's no philosophy here. That's the point.
about kinship and possessions and favors, and that's what we're doing right now.
No, I actually disagree with that completely.
Yeah.
There's no knowledge involved. When the cuckoo chick pushes the egg out of the nest, the chick has no idea what it's doing. There's no philosophy. When the bird goes away from the nest pretending it has a broken wing, it doesn't know what it's doing. The genes are driving it to do what it does.
Okay. Well, maybe this is just carryover from, chimps and the things that came before chimps, really, that just haven't changed.
What?
Pre-chimp instincts, you might say.
No, I think we're different than chimps. I mean, we're different from chimps. Well, first of all, chimps and bonobos are only 1 million years apart from each other, have totally different behaviors. I don't think you can look at any other primate and predict what the human behaviors are going to be, because that sexual selection is very powerful. So you have bonobos and you have chimpanzees. Chimpanzees mate from the back. They never, and this was actually an experiment done in a zoo where they took bonobos from birth. We're not watching others. There's no culture involved. And they raised these bonobos from birth and they mate facing each other. So, and the same thing with chimpanzees. You raise them from birth and they mate the other way. And 30 years ago, they thought these were just different races in the same species. So, sexual selection can go. Now, why did one species decide on one mode of sexual behavior and another species decide on a different mode? We don't know. I mean, it's kind of like, a little, got over a threshold and then kept on running forward is basically what we don't know why gorillas are so totally different than chimpanzees or gibbons. Yeah.
You indicated, I think I heard you correctly, that every environment is finite.
Yes.
Does that mean like Stone Age versus Iron Age? I don't understand that.
The
How do
Earth.
you tell when one stops and the other one?
Oh, let's take the whole Earth.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry? The question is, what do I mean by saying every environment is finite? Okay, this is actually from Malthus, who was the economist who realized that with exponential growth, if you're using up resources, very quickly you run out of resources. Okay, so it doesn't matter. I mean, defining the whole
Well,
Earth.
historically, you don't tie it in. Like in geology, like Precambrian periods, the Pennsylvanian areas and all that.
Well, the life has coated the Earth for 3 billion years.
Right.
Okay. That means for 3 billion years, there's been more organisms born that can survive on the resources. Okay? And that's what drives evolution. So for a brief period of time, there's enough resources for everybody, and then boom, it stops. That's my Martian example. I don't know how much land is on the Earth. I don't know if anybody knows, but it's finite. Okay? And even if we go to the rest of the solar system is finite. Now, the physicists can argue about whether the universe is infinite, but I don't think that has any relevance to this. Yeah.
I thought I heard you indicate that essentially evolution for humans stopped many thousands of years ago. What is
No, I don't think it stopped thousands of years ago. If you are an optimist, okay, industrialization basically reduces population size. So people used to think there was a population explosion in the 1960s and 70s. And what happened, what they discovered is now Japan, population is going down, Europe, population is going down. If it wasn't for immigration in the United States, our population, we're not reproducing enough. So basically the idea is that when you have industrialization, education, women get smart enough, educated enough to avoid having babies. And that happens in every industrialized, educated, democratic society. So if you're an optimist, so this goes against instincts, right? We're having less babies. Every woman, most women in this room have the potential to have 10 children or more. But except in rare societies, I don't know if anybody has 10 children, that doesn't happen in industrialized societies. So that means in the future, the whole world becomes that way. That's certainly not the way it is, as you know, in some parts of the world. But if you're an economist and you say 1,000 years from now, the whole world's going to be industrialized and then peace and harmony, which, the last couple of years seems less likely. But, if one was an optimist, then you would say, what gene would possibly give you an advantage at having babies? Smarter people don't have more babies. No matter how much, genes play in intelligence, they're not smarter people than more babies, which means the population can't get smarter. There's nothing driving greater intelligence. There's nothing driving greater beauty, whatever that might mean, which is different in different cultures, because, especially in monogamous democratic culture, because monogamy allows most people to find a mate. And so everybody, I think Frank Sinatra said that, right? Everybody finds somebody sometime. So then the question is, what genes could possibly evolve? Now, of course, you're talking genes that are for diseases. That's not what makes us human beings. What distinguishes us as human beings is the way we think, most importantly, and the way we look. And those two aspects are not involved in deciding who has more babies in a educated, industrialized, democratic society. Yeah.
Being gay, at least on the end, is very heavily genetic. And now
Well, you know, it's, let me just say something about that for a minute. There are, I've talked to more gay men than I have to gay women, but in the genetic community, men appear to say very often when they're gay that it's something that they were born with from birth, and much less amenable to change. Whereas I've talked to some women who don't agree with that. So I think gay women and gay men, I think they're very different things.
Okay, so let's say gay men.
Okay, gay men's easy.
What is the strong genetic component?
Yeah.
Now,
And most gay men will tell you that.
now for modern technology,
Yeah.
these gay men are biologically involved in children. Or at least they can if they choose.
Well, it's all questions of numbers. I mean, lots of gay men got married, you know, like the governor of New Jersey, and had children. But if you look at gay men as a group and compare them to men who are straight as a group, there's less children. Gay men have less children. So there's some children, but less children than with straight men. Yes. So with modern technology, yeah, I didn't want to talk about that, but I wrote about that. Yes, gay women can have babies together, gay men could have babies together. I mean, not in the current political environment, but in another one.
So
Yes.
then will this genetic pool of gay people over time increase?
Well, the problem with any kind of evolution, not that I think it's a problem, is that there are 6 billion people. And as far as a population geneticist, evolutionary biologist is concerned, all 6 billion people are having sex with each other. I mean, in biological terms, okay? Everybody's having sex with everybody else. We know that for AIDS. Now, when a population is that big, you can do calculations about how quickly it can evolve, and basically the sun will burn out before we can evolve. And this is the, I don't think it's a problem actually, but it's because you have all these different, you know, assuming that nothing else, that we actually survive and the global community survives. And evolution is not something, so gay men will have babies, yeah. Bad.
Where do you put antisocial behavior or even criminal behavior on this bell-shaped curve? And do you think that's perhaps a genetic trait?
Well, it's that I can't answer. And that question is like saying, you know, I'm in tone with women. There is a genetic component in some cases. It's a huge environmental component as well. But I'll think about the genetic. I mean, we know that, okay, because you can look at. I mean, you can look at cultures over time as environmental conditions change. You can get more criminal behavior or less. But there's also a genetic influence, and the most severe and extreme case is a case. There's a family in the Netherlands where there's a mutation in a gene called monoamino oxidase, and this is a gene that makes a protein that's involved in making neurotransmitters, which is what our neurons communicate with. Boys who are born with this mutation are normal, and then when they go through puberty, there's over a 90% chance that they're going to kill somebody or rape a woman. So that's a very, very powerful genetic component. It's clearly due to this mutation. And it makes perfect sense. I mean, we can do that. We can make that genetic modification in mice. And the mice do the same thing. So, you know, this is an example of a small number of people who are way out on the curve. And actually an interesting ethical question, which is, you know, if you had a genetic, and I haven't talked about genetic ethics at all, but imagine that there was a boy living next door, and you had a daughter in your house, and the boy was 10, and that boy had a mutation which by the age of 15, he was probably going to rape a woman or girl. The question is, would you want to know about this? Would it be right for you to know about this before he's committed the crime? Even though he's very likely to commit the crime. And this is no longer science fiction. There's a movie with Tom Cruise. It was kind of a similar kind of theme. This is not science fiction anymore. This is reality. And I don't have an answer to that question because, you know, you have competing interests here. Your privacy interests versus, you know, if it's your house and your daughter, you want to know if there's somebody living next door who's going to explode after going through puberty. Now, the other possibility, what can be done in this particular case is that you can use particular drugs to eliminate the trait. And so, you know, in a rational society, you would try to convince the parents to give these drugs to the child so the child would behave this way. But the parents said no. I mean, you know, I can't, these are not questions I have answers to. These are ethical problems you're going to have to deal with someday.
We're going to keep you here all night.
I don't know.
Anybody else have any questions, come down and ask him. I think we better let him go.
Okay.
Thank you.